Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining today. It's nice to see a lot of you here. Happy fall. It's officially fall now. So, um, thank you for joining my first class today in this three-part course or series on articulation. So, articulation is a topic of flute technique and expression, which I'm extremely passionate about and I love to talk about. So I thought, and I find that a lot of flutists maybe struggle with this aspect of playing, both technically speaking and expressively. So I thought it a very important topic to talk about and to share with you all. So thanks again for joining. So I'm going to kind of split this up in three parts as the class is designed. The title of the class is Articulation, Function, and Fashion. So today we're going to talk more about the functional aspects, those technical aspects. The second class will probably be devoted more to like continuing on that practice strategies, and then we'll get into the more fashion aspect, which is related to style and expression. So some of you I know joined my class that I did last year called Playing with Ease, or you might be familiar with that. And what EASE stands for is efficiency, accountability, sustainability, and effectiveness. So these are four words that are extremely important in my guiding principles to anything that I approach musically and technically on the flute. So I'll just give a brief rundown of the meanings of those words, even though we know what they mean, but just to kind of define it in the context of this conversation. So efficiency means that the effort is corresponding to the results of the work and vice versa. So in order to be efficient, we must have practices or ways of doing things that are sustainable, that are natural. And what natural means, as we've discussed in other classes, is to reflect nature. So that is an important part, both technically and expressively when we're talking about articulation. If we want the instrument to be an extension of ourselves, which I think many of us do, then we really need to pay more attention to ourselves when we're not playing the flute. And that's going to give us also a lot of the answers that we need when we are playing the flute, technically speaking, and again, expressively. So our learning processes as a child are all intuitive, right? Our mom and dads make sounds and we, follow back, goo goo gaga, mommy, all of this stuff. And that's how we begin to learn to make sounds. And the process of creating sound is very intuitive in that sense. And we, through nature and our environment, we learn these sounds. Now, when we learn to play the flute, it's a different learning process. We're more developed at that point in time. And the flute also seems like something external because we're holding an object, but actually all of the sound production is internal on the instrument. So that's going to be an important, facet of studying these articulation concepts. Now, accountability. To me, accountability is all about honesty, integrity, and responsibility. So one of the things when we talk about getting into practice mode is, are we really honest with ourselves about where our skills are and where we want them to be? And sometimes, practicing is a very emotionally involved process. And as it should be in some ways, but in other ways it shouldn't be, in the sense that we often get very judgmentally critical of ourselves rather than be analytically critical of what we're doing. And that's a very important, again, process, and connecting with those intuitive processes, because they're no longer intuitive. So we have to kind of go back and observe in an analytically critical way what we're doing in order to understand it well, right? We want to make sure that our ego is not getting in the way of that, and sometimes that's where the, negative emotion can come in the practice. Integrity is all about your preparation, no matter the circumstance, right? So it doesn't really matter if you're playing a concert at Carnegie Hall or in the Salvation Army Band or whatever. It's all about doing your best, right? So that's a very important part of approach to practice and things that you're doing. Sustainability is all about long-term success and impact. Is your approach also reliable for the long term? Is it going to be there for you over a long period of time? We often practice to do rather than to understand. And doing is important, but if we're just kind of building a muscle memory without a certain level of a deeper understanding, then as soon as we don't practice continually at that level where we were practicing when it was just muscles, it's going to go downhill pretty quickly, because you're not executing necessarily understanding of what you're doing. You're just kind of letting your muscles take over. So this is how I sometimes ask my students, what's the difference between trying and doing? Trying is when you don't understand and you're just making attempts to make it happen and literally trying different things. And doing something is executing an understanding of the task at hand. So that's a very important part of sustainability in your articulation. And we'll look at that when we're talking about these technical aspects. I like to think of anything regarding technique on the flute. And when I talk about technique, I'm not talking about fingers. I'm talking about anything, any element that it takes to play the instrument well, whether that be sound, articulation, fingers, how it all comes together, that creates our technique of playing the instrument. So for me, technique is like baking. If you want to bake a cake and you want the same cake every day, say you have a bake shop, right? And you have a prize-winning cake and everyone's coming in to buy that cake or bread or whatever it is, you cannot just throw things in a bowl and hope for the best. A little dab of this, a little dab of that. Baking is more of a science. Certain ingredients go together to come up with a final product. So you really have to, again, have an understanding of those formulas that will make your playing sustainable over time. If not, it's just a lot of guesswork. And that's what part of practicing is. There is a certain amount of guesswork sometimes, but if you want to be efficient and you want to have that reliable and sustainable technique, it's really important to have an awareness and understanding of those things that you're doing, technically speaking. Now, this all comes together basically to create effectiveness. Effectiveness is a product of efficiency, accountability, and sustainability. If we really understand how to do something and we do it with that honesty and integrity, more often than not, it will be effective, right? So it all comes together. So now let's get into some specifics of articulation. As I said at the beginning, I feel like this can often be an elusive goal for flutists, and sometimes it seems like we're on the quest for the Holy Grail or something as we're trying to, find clarity and expression and all of this. What we don't realize is that we practice articulation all day long without the instrument. Because the flute does not have any extra step like a reed, or we don't buzz into a mouthpiece or something like that, we have, the flute is basically an open tube that projects what we do. It essentially serves as a microphone. I've talked about this before if you've been in my classes. So we really need to what we need to pay attention is to what we're doing again without the flute. And that goes back to our intuitive processes. So when we're talking about articulation in terms of speaking, what we're really talking about is how we enunciate our words, right? We're talking about diction. The way we use the consonants, and we have this kind of framework from the consonants and our resonant sonorities that we create through vowels and this vocal quality, comes together to create an articulation or a kind of enunciation that is both defined and compelling. However, in this quest for clarity, we often form some detrimental habits, I think, that are maybe get in the way of the ultimate goal. And we have some misconceptions, maybe due to lack of understanding or misleading terminology, and of course, careless practice. So let's talk a little bit about that. So depending on your native language, most, especially if you're a native English speaker or even Romance languages, the tongue placement is going to be like about the same in the mouth in terms of where we use our consonants that start a note, right? So T or D. Can everybody just say to themselves, today and door, say both of those words, today, door. You'll notice that the placement of the tongue is in a quite similar position. It's just the usage is slightly different. The T is slightly more pointed. The D is slightly more like a little bit more of the tongue and slightly more muted. Now, in terms of where you're putting it in your mouth, it's kind of maybe difficult to describe this in exact terms, but it's basically the T or the D, the flat part just above the tip of your tongue, kind of touches somewhere on the fleshy ridge above the top of the teeth. So it's not on the teeth, or it's not higher than that, because then you'd be like curling your tongue back, right? And if we curl our tongue back, then we wouldn't be able to resonate inside the mouth. If everyone just also says to themselves, like when you're just watching TV and you're kind of zoning out, and you just say, like, you're not going to say it literally when you watch TV, but like, duh, your jaw naturally hangs open. Like, most people don't clench their jaws, or hopefully they don't when they're just watching TV. You don't sit with your teeth like closed or your jaws clenched. And you also don't extend the jaw. We hear that term, drop the jaw, a lot in flute playing. And I think that can also be a little confusing, because people tend to overextend the jaw, or in the front, when the jaw is, of course, a hinge that opens way back here. But that hinge, usually when we're just at kind of our relaxed state, is kind of hanging open. And the tongue in the mouth is sort of just floating in the center. So if you say duh or you kind of don't feel your tongue in your mouth. It's just kind of floating. And that's where it should kind of naturally be. So some people may have some other, ways of placing the tongue for this consonant that is our most common way of articulating, right, to begin a note. Some people might talk about what is called, it's gotten the name French tonguing. However, I've spoken to several very prominent French flutists that kind of look at me strangely. They don't really know what I'm talking about. So that is tonguing between the lips. Now, probably maybe somebody did it at some point and it kind of got passed down the line. But again, going back to efficiency, sustainability, is there any point in time when we're speaking that we tongue between the lips for any consonant? Nope. And so can it be done? Of course, many people do it and it's fine. And you can practice anything and make it work for you. But is it efficient and is it effective? Now, here's the problem for me with tonguing between the lips. And some people might call this also like a spitting rice technique, or might use this technique for articulation. The problem with that is when you put the tongue out of the mouth, what's happening inside the mouth? Let's all stick our tongues right on our lips, outside of our mouth, and let's try to talk. Let's say something. Can anybody understand anything I'm saying? No. You have no resonance inside the mouth as soon as you stick the tongue outside of the mouth. So while the initial sound or the ping you may get from that release here, what is the resulting sound after that? Because that's really what we want to project into the flute. So let's talk about the consonant sound. What is the job of a consonant? The job of a consonant is to frame a vowel. So a vowel is what is our sound production, and our consonant is just going to frame that. Let's think about this also. When we speak a word that begins with a consonant, such as T or D, which do we prepare first, the consonant or the vowel? The vowel. So when you breathe, for example, and if you want to say like today, I'm shaping my mouth for the oo, today. So I'm actually preparing the vowel first. I'm not putting my tongue in place today, right? The tongue kind of goes in and out very quickly, but you prepare the vowel first. So the kind of chain of command is that you prepare the vowel, prepare the consonant, release the consonant, release the vowel. So it's kind of like a sandwich with the consonant in the middle of the preparation and the action of the vowel on the outsides. So what we're actually trying to project is not the consonant. In fact, if I only use consonants and I was trying to project my consonants, there's no sound. You cannot understand what I'm saying. So I can have as much diction as I want to on a consonant, but if there's no clarity in a vowel and there's no resonance happening after the consonant, it doesn't matter how clear I enunciate my consonant. So that's why personally, I'm not so much in favor as a general articulation. Now, it might work in some circumstances, or if you're looking for a specific sound, a tongue that is outside of the mouth, starting outside the mouth, because if you're preparing the consonant first, you probably haven't prepared the vowel sound. And that is what we want to project forward, or we need to project forward even. This is extremely important. Another method of tonguing, which I've seen often on the flute, is something called, it might be called different things, but I've heard it called like anchor tonguing, or that's a method where the tongue is sort of rested on the lower lip. It's very forward and kind of like here. But if I try to speak to you again like this with my tongue resting on a lower lip, I mean, these are generally problems that they might recommend you to see a speech therapist for if you had that problem just as a person, right? So if that's going to be the case without the flute, then I don't think it's going to be the most effective thing with the flute. I think the argument is that the tongue is very forward so that it will create a more rapid articulation because you won't have to have much movement. But the problem is if it's anchored in the mouth, you will have no flexibility of vowel because in order for vowels to change, the tongue has to be free. So if the tongue is anchored, it cannot be free. So it may be useful in some ways, but it's going to be detrimental in other ways. So again, you want, in my opinion, you want a tongue position that is neutral and will allow you to use the tongue in a very clear and natural way, in a way that you use all day when you're not playing the flute. Now, I'll sort of demonstrate some of those things that I was talking about. So if I tongue outside of the mouth, it's very hard for me to get a really focused resonant sound in the mouth afterwards. It kind of sounds like air, you know, and air is important. Air delivers the sound to the instrument, but it's not actually what shapes the sound. That's the resonant qualities inside your oral cavity, inside your body. Okay, so now I'm going to bring the tongue back to where I normally would place it when I say a word with T, like today. So I'm shaping my mouth more for a ooh or an ah, something a little bit more open, and you can hear the difference. That's outside of the mouth, sounds a bit shallow. That's more inside the mouth, that's a little bit more round and focused. If I were to do a kind of resting the tongue on the lip, again, for me, that kind of diffuses the sound because you're also not able to make as defined of an aperture. So again, when we're talking about technique, everything works in tandem. So we have to ask ourselves, like, yes, this maybe seemed like it was useful in an articulation way, but is it affecting other aspects of my playing, such as my embouchure stability or my ability to form that resonant space in the mouth that I'm trying to make? I should say, as always, if people have questions, I try to leave a little time at the end, but you can always put them in the chat box as well, so I can be sure to address them at some point, whether if it's today or a future class. So some of those terminology, confusing terminology pieces that we have in terms of articulation, I think one of the biggest ones is that we call the start of a note an attack. And again, as we just discussed, the release of the consonant is just that. It's a release. It's not a motion going forward like this, you know, you'd have to say because ta, you're releasing. So in order to get more clarity, it's not about hitting it harder because you're not hitting something. What you do have to have is more pressure on the release of your consonant. Just like I wanted to say today, I kind of back up the pressure on the tongue and then release the consonant. In any case, I still have to have that vowel ready. Today. But if you want to have a more pungent articulation, something like that, then I have to have a lot of pressure backed up on the release of my consonant. Now I'm going to still use T, but I'm going to make it a little less pressure on the release. Usually the more pressure you use on the release will also create sort of a bigger volume, because it's like the sound is making a bigger splash in the water almost. You can think it like that. Now I'm going to use a D, but I'm going to still use a lot of pressure on the release. I don't know how well it comes across over Zoom. Sometimes the subtle differences don't come across very well, but in my ear, a D consonant with a strong pressure creates a little bit deeper sound as well, where a T is a little bit more like pinging or popping, where D also helps to create a little bit more length. Of course, that has to do with vowel as well. But that's something really important when we're thinking about these attacks. They're not actually attacks, they're releases. And so how we prepare, again, talking about that vowel, ta, we have to think about that exact moment when the tongue releases to initiate the sound. So you might want to call it the onset of the note or the initiation of the note or something like that. But I think the term attack in itself is slightly misleading. Okay. We often also focus entirely on the beginning of the note when we're talking about articulation. But as we've been talking, the middle of the note and the end of the note are extremely important. I like to think of every articulation like a sandwich or an Oreo cookie. Let's say the double stuffed Oreo cookies, not the single one, the double ones. If you're going to have an Oreo, just, really go for it. In any case, same thing with a sandwich. If you buy a sandwich, right, you want whatever's inside to balance out your two pieces of bread. You don't want just two pieces of bread with like one little measly piece of lettuce and, half a piece of cheese or something. Like, you want something good in the sandwich. That's why you bought a sandwich, not only bread, right? Or you want quality bread to also hold the center of your sandwich in. So the bread is kind of defining the filling in that way. So let's say that each piece of bread is about 25%, or your Oreo, cookie parts are about 25% in terms of the quality of the sandwich. So that's going to be the beginning of the note and the end of the note are 25%. 50% is the middle of the note. That's the vowel sound or the sound quality that you're getting, okay? So if you made it a test for yourself, let's say your onset of the note, the beginning of the note, is pretty good. So let's give it 20%. But the middle of your note is not very clear. It's fuzzy and not as defined. Maybe we only give you 15 out of 50. So that's 35% we're at. And then the end of your note was kind of hard to tell what you were doing. So we'll give you about a score of 10 on that. So that's what, 45. Last time I checked, that wasn't a good grade, right? So we have to kind of see the whole picture when we're really looking at this articulation. And we tend to just focus on that initial initiation of the consonant aspect when we're looking at being clear. So every note we play must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't matter what it is. That will really give things its definition. Now, this is going to be really important too when we talk about style and that kind of thing later on. But if you're even practicing, especially when practicing short notes, again, we think as soon as we articulate, the note is over. Like if I just do, it's kind of like I'm saying dit, 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 dit. But I want to make sure it really resonates. Can you hear at the end of my note that it's really ringing? It's really defined. It's not, or something. Even if I just let it fall, that completely changes the feeling of the note, right? Again, we're going to talk more about that, but we got to remember that the end of the note is the last thing that the listener hears, and that's going to give them the impression of the note. So it doesn't even matter if your beginning and middle were good. If your end is not good, the note's not good. So the end of the notes are extremely important, and we kind of want them to be like mirroring the beginning, because that creates a cycle. something like this. So every note has a clear definition. If I just focused on the consonant, my tone gets immediately spread, sharp, undefined, without a feeling, and that kind of thing. So I'm really making sure that every note, I have a clear vowel sound, and that consonant is framing that vowel really well for the projection of the tone. Because again, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is project the sound through the articulation. Now let's get into another important aspect of articulation that I think a lot of flute players might struggle with, or they'd like to be easier or better, and that is double tonguing, right? So again, we've been going on with the flute, you know, once we start playing the flute, we're playing flute for a few years, ta-ta-ta, we're all happy as a lark, just articulating with T, and then all of a sudden this big bad K comes along and it's like throwing everything like into a mess, right? And we get all confused about what we're supposed to be doing, you know? And I think sometimes even our teachers are really well-meaning. It's just like, oh, now you gotta learn to double tongue, and here's this K, and it appears to be something maybe scarier than it is, you know? So if we say the word, for example, taco, that's basically double tonguing, right? So taco, taco, taca, 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 and then we just change the consonant to the same consonant. But we're not really kind of explained that, I think, in a very simple process, you know? It's just like all of a sudden you got a tongue with your throat and you're like, and it's like you feel like you're choking. And, you know, I remember when I first tried to learn to double tongue, that did not sound very good, right? So I think we all went through that really awkward phase with double tonguing. And for some people, it still remains to be something challenging, especially because the initial maybe interaction with it was not a very good one or a very easy one. One thing we have to realize is that that as we release the ta with pressure, it's not like the entire tongue is going like way back here to like get the K, or if you're using daga, daga, like a g or a k, it's not this like daga, 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 like, you know, kind of gumball in your mouth kind of movement. It's actually quite a small movement. It's an alteration. Ta, ka, ta, ka. You kind of kick with the back of the tongue. Ta, ka, and it kind of kicks it back. So ta releases, ka, and you kick it back. What needs to remain consonant the whole time is the vowel. And it's the vowel that usually gives people problems in double tonguing, not the consonant. Everyone always says, oh, I'm trying to make my double tonguing even. Sometimes I even hear people practicing kind of just with speech, and they're going, making these sounds like this, and there's no vowel sound whatsoever. And it's like, well, that's why it's uneven, because you can't, consonances can't really be even in length. Only vowels can be even in length. The only thing consonants can be even with is their release of pressure. So if you want the same clarity on the consonant, taco, they have to have the same amount of pressure release. Taco, enunciation in that sense. So if I said taco and I got softer, taco, taco, that would sound like this on the flute. The second one is a little weaker. The pitch even goes down a little bit. So I'm going to make sure I really keep the pressure even now. So that is saying taco. Now I'm going to do just ta, two T's. Now this is with a K. As you can hopefully hear, they sound essentially the same. And that's what we want. We want them to sound essentially the same. If we get this, which often happens, what happened that time is I said basically uh-oh in the middle. I added a glottal stop. So one of the biggest problems with double tonguing is that people tend to add an extra unwanted unnecessary step, and that's this little like glottal stop, because when we release the T, we think we got to go back there and get the g or the k. So we close the glottis. With the glottis, we close the throat. We call that a glottal stop, right? When you say uh-oh, something like that. So when you hear uneven double tonguing, something like that, or it's usually because there's this glottal stop in there that's unwanted. So if I want my tonguing to sound even, I'm using difficult notes for the fingers just to show this so you can hear that it's really remaining even. I have to focus on the vowel being the same length. Both the consonant release has to be the same pressure. I'll do it slowly to more quickly. So what did not happen when I got faster is I did not make the vowel shorter. And we tend to shorten the vowel when we get faster because we think we have to, do something more. So we shorten up that vowel, and we tend to kind of get stuck only with consonants. Have you ever heard like someone, trying to play Carnival of the Animals or something with a lot of, and it sounds very like that? That's what's happening. There's no vowel sound, right? Because we've just shortened it so much that we're just got consonants left over. That's what we don't want. It might sound like it's like projecting somehow in our ears because our tongue's really close to our ear, but in the hall, you won't hear sound projecting because there's no vowel. So how I usually describe this when I'm teaching is a way to kind of think about it when we're speeding up and we're trying to get this rapid articulation in the double tongue. If you're working in a candy factory and your job is to put the wrappers on the candy bars and you've got a conveyor belt that's moving, you've got two sizes of candy bars. You've got the little, I think they're called fun size, and then you've got the king size. I think the big one should be called fun size, but anyway, the little ones are called fun size, and then you've got the king size, right? So as the conveyor belt moves faster, which one is easier to pick up? The little one or the big one? The big one, right? Because you have more surface area to grab as the conveyor belt moves faster, right? So we want to keep the length of the vowel as long as we can when we start getting faster, especially with, really rapid articulation. If I don't keep the vowel long, I get, and actually it's like it's like inhibiting me to be able to actually let the tongue kind of roll in that sense. So in that said, I think it's important to talk about like which kind of vowel to use. It might depend on which register you're in. Actually, it depends a lot on that. For example, I find that a lot of flutists like really have a hard time with low register articulation, like rapid articulation. A piece like the Jolivet Chantelinos comes in mind. You know, you have this low D's repeated articulation. Well, what we have to think about is that when we're trying to create clarity with the consonant, this clarity adds a lot of pressure in the mouth. And what we don't want in the low register is an excess of pressure. So we really have to think about how to lower the pressure with the vowel. So if I have a lot of repeated articulation in the lower register, I'm going to use a vowel shape. I'm not going to choose maybe E, because E keeps the tongue very high in the mouth and will create a lot of pressure. So if I try to like put the tongue kind of high and articulate with a lot of pressure in the front, it's almost going to jump the octave. You see, it wants to jump the octave really quickly. So a simple kind of gradation of vowels that I use is if you all say pet, cat, not, dog. Ah. So you can say please, maybe please pet, cat, not dog. So you have ah. So in the low register, I want to be more towards dog. I want to be more towards the ah. So the back of my tongue is a little lower, makes it more relaxed, but I still want to use that pressure in the front, right? So before I use the pressure in the front, I have to kind of compensate for it and lower the pressure in my mouth otherwise. If not, it might crack, right? The last one cracked a little bit, so. Low C or even low B, that's going to be the most challenging, right? That's what's really, you have to really work to find the sweet spot of pressure from the consonant and the lack of pressure from the vowel shape that you're using, right? Now, in the upper register, you might want something a little more sparkly, not as open or as heavy, depending on what you're playing. Like I said, the carnival, the animals. You might want something a little closer to an E or an eh that keeps the tongue a little higher, so it keeps things a little lighter. And of course, as I go down and register, I'm not going to keep the same vowel because it's going to, if I kept the E, then the sound's not going to project. So I actually have to change it, change the vowel shape, even though the consonant might not change, you know? So we have to be conscious of that too in different registers, like how to manage that. So it might sound like complicated, but it's actually not. We do that all the time, like in our speech, right? Like if we're speaking like in a higher voice or something, and then we go to a lower emotion, we do it all the time. It's just that we don't really think about it at all because it's intuitive again. So again, that's why we need to go back. We need to kind of, again, be critically analytical of these intuitive processes that we have and realize that we don't have to have like a French technique or any kind of special technique to do it. We have the human technique. We all have the built-in qualities to create a clear and compelling articulation. So another way I like to practice that to get the continuation of sound in the double tonguing is if you say nunga nunga, so like nunga 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 nunga. So if you like you're saying Nicole and you hold the N, nunga 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 nunga. You can go really fast, right? So then I'm going to go from nunga nunga to dugga dugga. So I'm just going to open it up and then to taka taka. Nunga nunga dugga dugga taka taka 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 nunga nunga dugga dugga taka taka. And you see from the nunga 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 that the tongue barely moves. And then when you switch to dugga dugga, you realize it's almost the same. Nanga nanga daga daga 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 taka daga nanga nanga daga daga taka daga nanga nanga daga daga taka taka ta. The mouth stays very neutral. So I find that that's a good way to also feel kind of what the tongue is doing when you're not playing, right? I find it's helpful because it's really, again, important to have that continuation of sound. In something like N or M, you can do it with your lips closed, M, but N, na, 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 you get that continuation of sound. So again, we want to avoid just enunciating consonants without the resonance and the continuation of sound. That is usually, we're going to talk more about practice solutions in the next installment of this class. But I find that that is one of the biggest issues, is when we practice from slow to fast. And often why I find this is why slow practice is often not as effective as it could be, is because we tend to change the parameters. So if you're practicing slowly and then you start to change things when you get faster, like shortening up the vowel or playing sooner, that's another problem with double tonguing that makes it uneven, because if you're not thinking about that vowel immediately after you release the consonant, the T sound, then the ka will come too soon. And you get like, so one thing that I think to create that cycle that's really important is if you actually think of the K, the ka, or whatever you want to call it, ga, as the pickup, is that really will put it on the offbeat and connect it forward. So like ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta. So think of the cycle that way. So rhythmic clarity is also extremely important, that again, evenness, that the ka comes as late as possible without being late, basically. Because as soon as you go ta ka ta ta ka ta ta ka 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 ta ka, when you get faster, you're gonna get, you might almost get like a dotted thing, or you might have heard Mendelssohn Scherzo a little uneven like that sometimes, right? So okay, so the evenness is coming both from the vowel length being the same and the consonants having the same amount of pressure and being the same distance apart. That's something that's very, very important. So we're nearing the end of our time together today, and I always like to leave time for some questions, or if anything that I may have said today or explained, you want further clarification or further thoughts on that, I'm happy to answer your questions. And as you know, I love questions, so you can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and just ask the question as well. But sometimes it's easier to put in the chat, but whatever you prefer.
I've got sort of a question. I really like the idea of comparing vowel sounds to, or speech patterns in general, to what we're doing on the flute, and what it feels like to speak, and kind of trying to figure out what that's like and then replicate it on the flute. I guess it's a little bit hard for me to word what I'm thinking about because I'm sitting here thinking with my mouth, thinking with my brain and my mouth. Um, but do you have particular exercises that you're talking about to experience different vowel sounds, or do you walk down the street saying like, please
I
pat on?
don't even think that we replicate it on the flute. I simply think that the flute receives what we're projecting as humans. So I don't think like the flute is creating an extra step for us, like it's just simply projecting that. So I don't really practice that per se. There might have been a point in time where I did walk down the street saying nunga nunga or something like that, just to kind of experience that. But what what I'm getting at is that, if you really have that analysis and understanding of what you're doing, then when you practice, it will be very readily available to you. Um, the problem happens is that sometimes if it's been taught to us in a different kind of way that's not very intuitive, effective, efficient, or sustainable, then we're practicing to kind of undo some of those things, right? And that's where we can get into muddy waters. And sometimes it's best to just kind of go back to the beginning and have a conversation with yourself. Without the flute, what would I be doing? And that's always the answer for me. I always go to that. If something is not working, I just go, okay, this tube is only projecting what I'm doing. So I have to stop thinking in the lens of this tube, and I have to think about me, the human who is a living, breathing sound machine. And I have to understand what's happening. Now, part of it might be how you are connecting with the instrument. For example, that also, you could be having a beautiful vowel sound, but if your connection point to the instrument isn't very good, right? That could be like the placement on your chin or lip or wherever. If that, then it's not going to receive what you're doing very well. So that's another aspect technically that really has to be in place. So that's why I always say the problem is never the problem, because oftentimes the symptom might appear, but like the problem might be like related to another area. So you could actually have like no problems with your articulation whatsoever, but if your connection point to the instrument is not very good, then again, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. So we have to kind of analyze like all parts of the equation, I think, that come together to create that technical circumstance, and see if any one of those factors are contributing like detrimentally. Does that make sense? Okay, hope that answers your question. How long does it take to get a very fast double tongue with practice? I actually don't think it should take that long, but the problem is that, again, we've all learned it kind of in a um, here you go, have fun, do your best with it kind of way. And then we build these habits up, and then they're harder to undo later on, just because it's like that's what we kind of had to work with for a long time. So I don't really teach too many younger students, like beginners or something like that. But um, when I do have the opportunity to work with them, I do introduce that to them right away in the exact way that I did to you right now. Just using that lovely word taco that we all love to eat, right? So it's a very simple word, and all young people can say that word and they can understand how to make that sound. So yes, it does take practice to control, maybe especially the pressure, and release that we were talking about, and in the various consonants. We're going to get into that a little bit more in the next class. I don't know if I can tell you an exact amount of time, because it's going to really depend on a lot of other things, right? In terms of your experience with the instrument, or how solid your other skills are, right? So like, again, if you don't have a very strong connection to your instrument, or you haven't built up a really good tone quality, then the articulation might be a struggle for you as well. So it's really hard to separate like various aspects of technique, because they all go together to kind of bake that final product, right? Like we were talking about. So like the vowel sound that we're talking about, that is essentially the tone quality. then we get into the fingers, right? And that is actually another really big part of articulation that's important that we're going to talk about in the next class, because that goes in hand, of course, with the clarity of articulation, because there's a certain timing of release also with the finger that goes into play. So again, even if everything is like a-okay up here, if you've got rapid articulation also with finger movements, and the finger movements aren't the same timing and pressure release as the tongue, then you're going to have problems. So it's hard to isolate things sometimes. I mean, we have to sometimes in a way to kind of think about, okay, what's happening there and how does it fit into the equation? But there are going to be other factors that are going to affect that as well. Yeah. So a question regarding like tonguing sounding too hard. That could be again the balance of how much consonant and vowel you're using. Sometimes when the consonant sounds too strong, it's because there's not enough vowel, you know. So maybe it's you have to actually approach it more with like how you're shaping the vowel and then how that is connecting into the flute. So for example, I know that I want my embouchure hole to be in a position here where it's angled toward me enough. It's not, I'm not covering, I'm not like trying to cover all the embouchure, but it's angled toward me because we have this whole big resonant space in our head, right? That we're using, like singers when they, ooh, you know, you use your soft and everything, that all of that resonance is going up my head, and now it's gonna turn and it's gonna kind of go down like at the trajectory of like an airplane landing, right? So I want to make sure that when I release the consonant, it's like opening the gate like this, so that sound can land immediately in the flute. If I'm just thinking maybe across or something like that, then I'm getting kind of a hard consonant with some air, and then that tone is not sustained. And that's where it's going to sound maybe kind of hard. The other thing we can do is, like, even if we're looking for like a very undefined articulation, but still defining the sound, we can use a D kind of in the style of an L. That's often done like in Baroque music, for example, where you're barely making contact. La la. So that might be like, something like that, right? Rather than where it's something like that, you know? So what I'm trying to do is really use a vocal-like quality, ooh, but at the same time, with the front of the tongue, I'm doing like almost like a D in the style of an L, and then I want to make these like little releases, right? So I'm gonna do kind of the end of the note, almost like an M, dum dum dum, and we're gonna get talking about that when we talk about style. So I hope that helps. You know, again, it's sometimes hard to just have a conversation about it when you're not hearing exactly what someone's doing or seeing what they're doing. But I think that often what happens is it's like the ratio is a little off, or the connection with the flute is a little off, so that you just hear that initial consonant striking. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're about out of time for today, but if you do have questions that you think of and you plan on joining next time, which I hope you do, you can save them up, and because we are going to focus on practicing and practice solutions for the next class. The following class will be more like stylistic applications. We talk a little bit about that at the end. So you can save up those questions. In general, I mean, obviously the purpose of this class is for me to share my, opinions and my knowledge and my information, but I don't like to be a teacher with an agenda. I want to help people with what they want help with. So having your questions can really help me focus my thoughts and my experience, my knowledge to help you really with what you're working on. So don't be shy about that if you join my classes. Okay, everyone. Well, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you next month. Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.